Talk about seminary after.
All right, let me see here. Now I can find pictures.
One more question, Dave.
It's time for school days. Help for moms and dads of school-aged kids.
I tell parents, you're like a training wheel on a bike. Your job isn't to make the bike move. Your job is to keep the bike upright.
Those of us who are the true educators, we really want to be given the opportunity to educate the whole child.
We can get free college degrees based on all of the opportunities that are out here and available to our students.
Oftentimes, as parents, I think we want to protect our kids, but I think one of the greatest gifts we can give them is allow them to experience adversity.
Yeah.
Here's your host, Danita Bailey.
Well, good morning and welcome to School Days, Help for Moms and Dads of School-Aged Kids. I'm Danita Bailey.
And I'm David Bailey.
Wow, it's really been an exhausting few weeks, so let's recap. On May 5th, a video was released of Maud Aubrey, who was chased, gunned down, and killed while jogging by two white men. This event actually occurred in February, but the release of the video caused public outrage and forced the hand of law enforcement to actually arrest the two men. On May 25th, another black man, Christian Cooper, was bird watching in Central Park when he asked a white woman to put her dog on a leash. His sister began to videotape as the woman began to get upset and threatened to call the police on Christian and tell them, "There's an African American man threatening my life." Also, on May 25th, we saw a video of a black man named George Floyd who was suspected to have attempted to use a counterfeit $20 bill, being held down on the ground by three officers, one who pressed his knee into his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, cutting off his airway and eventually killing him despite pleas for his life. These injustices sparked outrage and prompted people across the United States and the world to protest, some of those ending in violence against police and riots. So that was the month of May. So, Dave, I'm really glad you're here in this episode. You and I have had really vastly different experiences. Do you want to talk about a few of the experiences that you've had?
Yeah. So most of my life, as many of you know, I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So when I first got there, I lived in a predominantly white neighborhood. So I was brand new to the school, and I moved from Washington State. And so when I got there, I was just trying to get adjusted. I was in second grade, and I'm just gonna get straight to it. I had several kids that used to call me nigger all the time, and I had never experienced that before. And so my parents told me to tell the teacher, and so then I would kind of quell it for a little bit. And then one year, I think that was maybe after second grade or third grade, I went to the park summer. So school was out, probably right around now. And one of the kids that used to call me that name, he came up to me with a couple of his friends, and he said, "You remember how when I was in school and I couldn't call you a nigger?" He said, "Well, now the teacher's not here to protect you. So what you gonna do about it?" And he said, "I'll never forget this to this day. I mean, it's just," he said, "Nigger, nigger," and his face, the vitriol in his face, just. It burned. That experience burned in my head. I'll never ever forget that. So fast forward to high school, I decided around 8th grade I wanted to go to the U.S. Air Force Academy because I wanted to be a pilot. So I worked hard through high school. I had to move up in the more rigorous math classes, and a big adjustment being one of the only minorities in my classes. I worked hard, grinding. I was 10 points short on my SATs of getting in directly into the Air Force Academy, but I was accepted into the Air Force Academy Preparatory School, which was en route to the Air Force Academy. You spend 1 year there, you get your SAT scores up, and then you move on. So Air Force Academy accepts 20,000 people. They 10,000 are qualified, and they only admit 1,000 a year. So it's a very selective school. And I was a part of that crew, and I got accepted. And I remember one of the kids said, "Well, the only reason why you got in is because you're black." And I was like, oh, really? That's so. They out of all the people that applied, I'm just a token black guy. I'm like, really? So I kind of brushed it off. And as you can see, I wear glasses. I'm blind as a bat now. I couldn't fly, which is what I wanted to do. So God took me on a different path. And I went to the prep school, got accepted in, got my appointment to the academy, which, still a proud accomplishment, but it was just still this thing of, inferiority. Like, you're not enough, you're not good enough, and you're not qualified. And that's a whole nother topic, as affirmative action. But yeah, it's real. It's real.
So my experience was a little bit different. So my parents grew up in Birmingham. I called all three of my parents, my dad and my stepmom and my mom, in preparation for this show. And my stepmother said, well, you remember now your dad marched with Dr. King and was thrown in jail with Dr. King. I was like, yes, no, I have not forgotten that. So that was kind of my parents when they were in high school. And then when my mom was in college, junior college, she worked at the NAACP in Birmingham, and she would talk about how Dr. King would come in there. And so, I grew up with those stories. However, we lived in a predominantly white neighborhood, upper middle class, and our world was very white. We didn't go to church. So there wasn't that opportunity there. We did not have black families that we spent time with. And my sister she went to college in Missouri, and she called my parents very angry and said, you guys didn't teach me how to be black. And my parents kind of laughed at her. And they said, okay. And so I asked my mom about that last night. I said, hey, Mom, tell me about that conversation, because I was too young to remember it. And she said, yeah, I told her, look, being black is not your issue. Being white or being black in a predominantly white world, specifically upper middle class and wealthy, and in corporate America, where you're probably not going to see anybody like you, that is what we wanted to prepare you guys for. That's what we chose to do. So that was kind of my experience, a little bit different from yours. Dave, are you still with me?
Yeah, I'm still there. Sorry.
You looked like you were having some issues.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was.
Yeah.
I'm good.
Yeah.
As you were.
Yeah, so we just want to give you a little bit of background about ourselves, but we don't want to spend too much time on ourselves because we have a whole lot of show today to talk about. I actually asked viewers and listeners and friends what questions they wanted us to ask. And so we've invited 3 experts to talk about racial injustice and how do you talk to your kids about it and how to be part of the solution. So before we go any further, let me just say it does take a village. If you hear a great parenting tip or nugget of advice, share it with your parent friends. Facebook it, Instagram it, tweet it, link it in, and add the hashtag School Days Show and hashtag I am School Dazed. And also, if you want to be a part of the show, please give us a call at 214-444-5575 if you have any questions or comments. And if you're live with us on Facebook, I'm watching, and you can drop us a question, and we will do our very best to get to you as soon as we can. So, David, you want to introduce our first guest?
Yes, sure. So we have Amisho Baraka, aka Show Baraka. He is an artist, content creator, speaker, and consultant. He's also a professor of hip hop and religion at Wake Forest University's School of Theology. He has traveled the world performing and speaking for more than a decade. He actively participates in various panel discussions, guest lectures on topics associated with art, vocation, marriage, race, culture, religion, and more. So through his talents and website, Show has positioned himself to be recognized as a thought leader and visionary with a knack for performance, production, and politics. Show aims to blend his artistic platform and academic knowledge to contribute a unique perspective to society in hopes of raising the standard, thereby enhancing the culture. And just personally, I've been following Show for years. I listen to his music, so it's just an honor that you're here for us today. I think I said before that my son was just in awe, like, you're just talking to Show, and so but we're really glad that you're here. So thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me.
And Nicole Franks is the wife of 20 years and a mother of three, ages 21, 17, and 15. Actually, is that true anymore? Are they those ages? Yeah, tell me what their ages are. This is from the last year when you were on the show.
All right. 21 years married now. 22-year-old still at Texas Tech.
Mm.
18-year-old, he graduates. Actually, has a ceremony next Wednesday. And my 16-year-old, who's going into the 11th grade.
Okay. Nicole is the Director of Diversity and Academic Coach at Alquin School in Dallas, Texas, where she has held positions for 15 years. Nicole oversees 3 diversity committees, conducts diversity training for students, faculty and staff, and parents, and supports off-site professional development for companies. Nicole has a Bachelor's of Arts degree in Speech Communication at Sam Houston State University and an MS in Human Relations and Business at Amberton University. So thanks so much for coming again.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Yes. So last year when you were with us, we had a wonderful discussion about diversity and understanding people that don't look like you. So if you want to reference another show of ours, please go back and check out that show. So our next guest is Jenny Brady, and she brings a unique perspective to the diversity discussion. Jenny is currently serving as the Director of Diversity for Prestonwood Christian Academy, a position created to express her passion for diversity while combining her personal experience growing up in Honduras. She holds an MS in sociology and a BA in Spanish. In the educational realm, Jenny has worked as a teacher and administrator and is on the leadership team at PCA. She is the co-founder of the Christian Educators Diversity Alliance, co-creator of the podcast Grace 360. Is that it? Yes. Yes. And is a speaker, teacher, author, and trainer on diversity, equity, and inclusion for schools across the country. So welcome, Jenny.
Thank you for having me.
All right. So let's jump right in. Oh, gosh. Tell me a little bit about your job as Director of Diversity. How successful, either of you, do you think you've been in your mission, and what have been kind of some of the challenges?
So one of the things in our mission that I probably talk about more than any part of the mission is compassionate global citizen. And I believe that entails and encompasses the whole equity and inclusion, especially today, the whole point of the show, more than now, compassion, that one word, you just have to have empathy, you have to have sympathy, you have to be patient, and you have to be calm. So I think that the things that we've been doing over the years has encompassed helping our students, even our parents, staff, and faculty, to be compassionate global citizens. So it's working well, and I have the support of my admin, parents. I think if I didn't have that support, it'd be way harder to get the message through to everyone and all the constituents of my school.
Mm-hmm. And Jenny?
Yeah, so at a Christian school, it's a little bit different in that we ground everything in what we believe is biblical truth. And so I work at attracting, training, and retaining a diverse community. And diversity for us, we have the acrostic GRACE. So it includes gender, race, age, ability, culture, and economic status. And so over the past 15 years, we've learned a lot of what we've done well and what we haven't done so well, but we continue to learn in those areas. We continue to grow, and we're very thankful for the diverse community that God has brought us. We started off, for instance, with 7% racially diverse. We're now 29% racially diverse. So we're seeing the fruit of the labor, but we're also looking at, our portrait of a graduate. We have certain things that we want our graduates to adhere to. And so we're looking at, are they truly adhering to those areas, especially when it pertains to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and, as Nicole said, empathy.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And Nicole, you were saying before we were on the air that you have a lot of meetings set up just today. And what are those meetings about?
So in the last year, we've been able to actually create a whole department. So we have coordinators now. We have equity and inclusion coordinators. And so what we've planned to do, not just send out a letter to say, we stand up on, our mission, of course, of including everyone, but now it's time to have the discussion, the action afterwards. So we have 3 meetings today, one for students to come age age 9 through 12. That's tomorrow. Sorry, I have so many, I can't even keep up. We have the section off by department, so departments can come and talk about age appropriate resources as well, how they feel and what they can do for their students. We have just the staff to come and say how what can they do, and it's more personal and professional. And then we have two parent meetings set up this evening and next Tuesday, both evening and morning, so they can come in and one just kind of express the way they feel. What can they do? And we are and this morning. This morning's meeting was about how are we going to help them. So we're doing pre-action. What were they doing before this happened? Uh, the proactive, what to do after, or what to do during this time to actually have these conversations, and then the post-action, which will be okay. Once everything's done, you still have to keep having the conversation, and so we're going to supply them with that. So our whole constituent, staff, faculty, parents, and students, and some alumni from our school will be part of the conversations, and we want to continue this all summer.
Yeah. Well, I have definitely been fielding a lot of questions just from my friends. We've talked a lot about how do we speak to our children about this. They're seeing a lot of images that we've never seen before, and they're asking questions. And, you know, some people don't know how to answer them. Some people are not answering them, or they're just not having the conversation at all. So I wanted to ask parents to give me questions, or I did. I asked parents, I posted on social media. We're going to have some people on the show talking about this. What do you want to know so that you can have these conversations well? And what are your kids asking you? So I have a bunch. We're going to get to as many of them as we can. Not even sure if I should start with this question because it is weighty and layered, but I'm going to ask it and see if we can, if you guys can begin to kind of answer it. So this first question from one of the parents, and actually it was from one of the parents' children, was, what started racism? Who wants to jump into that one?
That is, as you said, it's weighty, it's nuanced, it's steeped in a lot of history, and I would say I can only do it so much justice, but I'm gonna throw two books that I think will definitely help give definition to the progenitors of racism, and that's Stamped from the Beginning by Ibram Kendi, and then there's another one, The History of White People by Nell Irvin Painter. And so just in a very brief, terse way, I'm gonna try to say, first of all, we must understand that racism is a product of power, of trying to grasp power. And so slavery has always been a thing within society. So you had slavery, people would enslave their own people would enslave people who look like them. So racism wasn't slavery wasn't an invention of racism. It was actually vice versa. Slavery was created. And so what happened was, and I'm gonna skip a lot of information, but there was an explorer. Yeah, there was an explorer named Ibram Batuta who traveled to West Africa, and he glowed about the West Africans. And he said the West Africans were this, and that, and people didn't believe him. And so what happened was there was this Portuguese gentleman named Gomez de Zozo who went down there, and he was one of the first people who began to use color as a means, as a tool to enslave people. He began to write. No, I'm talking about. He wrote a novel. I'm sorry. He wrote a novel, our biography, and that celebrated the Prince of Portuguese at the time, or Portugal at the time, that encouraged people to begin to use race as a construct to enslave, because the whole goal was to civilize these folks. Before then, slavery was used in trade. Africans would enslave other Africans and sell them off for trade. And so, but what eventually happened was this individual said, look, there's these people in South Africa who are beasts. They're not civilized. They're not like the individuals this other explorer talked about. They're not wealthy. They're not expansive in their technology, if you will, their advancements. But there are other people on this continent, if you will, who are beasts. They're uncivilized, and we should civilize them not only through our religion, but if we could use them as commodity for trade and enslavement. And so you had to construct an idea about these people, and the idea was that they
Mm.
were uncivilized, and that way we could differentiate them through color. And so this was one of the first constructs of using race or identity as a mean for enslaving people. And from there, you move up to Western Germany or Western Europe, and Germany starts to develop the eugenics movement, which starts to bifurcate people, I guess you can say, or delineate people according to certain racial categories. And so this is like from the 1400s up into the 1700s where you start to see this large movement of race. Now, from there, then you begin to see the racial constructs in the Western world. But it wasn't really a thing until, I guess you can say, until like, 15th, 16th, 17th century. Um, and so from there, now we have an opportunity to commodify racism, right?
Mm-hmm.
And even in America, you had indentured servants who were brought over. You had black, you had Irish, you had all these different people, but it was easier to delineate who can be a servant because if the Irish would sneak away or if the Irish would get off the plantations or whatever, it was hard to determine whether or not they were free people. And so now you have Africans who, if you see an escaped dark skinned individual, well, they're an enslaved person. And so that was a way that was one of the easiest forms. And of course, this is a very elementary way and it's very quick. And that's why I reference those two books. But it's a very easy way to delineate who were free people versus who were slaves. So race was a construct that was created for the purposes of power. And we see the reciprocation of that even to this day.
I want to mention somebody on Facebook said that Stamped from the Beginning, the book that you mentioned, is free on Spotify right now for a limited time.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Oh, word? All right.
Anybody else want to jump in there?
Can I just add something? So if your child's school offers training for the teachers for equity and inclusion diversity, parents should support that because I was able to attend a training from, at the time, it's now Center for Justice and Equality. I can't remember the new name, but it was a training called Race in the Classroom, and some of the things that show just talked about, I learned, as well as and like you said, he did leave a lot of things out. And one of the things I think needs to be defined is, why is it a social construct? And that is because I don't have time to actually explain all this. I need y'all to go
Break it
understand
down. Break it
what
down.
that means, because it is of someone's opinion and thoughts that don't look like me. They thought what was skull shapes, lip structure, body structure, is what they thought was pretty and what was what it looks like. So if you're, they even, if you go research, you have skulls categorized as Caucasoid and Mongol. You have to kind of know so much more history, because it does not start.
Right.
Racism doesn't start here, but well, anyway, I need y'all to research that because we can't teach all the history right now. It's not enough time. But you have to be active. And if I could just throw this point in real quick, a lot of parents are saying, "What do I need to do? What do I need to say? And what's age appropriate?" I am a resource, so that's okay. For my school, they know that, and I'm okay with that. Please come to me. I have what you need. But the information that is out there that I have is just updated. It has been there. There are articles from 2012 on how to talk to your children about race.
Mm-hmm.
There are articles and videos. YouTube has every video to gardening and, how to stop your child from picking their nose. There are videos about how to talk to your children about all the identities, not just race. You have to be active. We can't teach your children because you're the first teacher that they've received. We work together as a team to build what I call world changers.
Mm-hmm.
So if your mind frame is not to change the world only until the world is changed by tragedy, we're going to be right back here saying the same things. You have to be active consistently, not when something bad happens. You have to go find the research. the African American friends and family can't give you all the resources, but they will love to see you come and say, "Hey, I just read this book stamped from the beginning, and this is what I thought." They would be like, "What? You read that? Okay, let's have a conversation." So be proactive even after now. I just want to encourage parents.
Well,
If I can just and I man, amen. And I think after all of what I've said in its convoluted, jumbled way, I think what I'm trying to communicate is that people have hated one another. Like I don't need a different skin color to dislike the person who lives next to me. All I have to do is just have a neighbor. I'll find a reason to dislike them. However, what racism did do is it built, and this is what I think is really important, and I think these books communicate. What racism did, it just didn't create a reason, a delineation for why I should hate somebody. It built structures and systems in which institutions, countries profited off of. You think about trade, the slave trade. Here's a institution of trade and commerce, and which is built off racism. You have sciences that have been built off of racism. You have imperialistic ideals that are built off racism. I think to Mrs. Frank's point, this idea of beauty, when we think about Hollywood, the institution of Hollywood for the first 50, 60 years is an institution that built this idea of perpetuating what is beautiful to people. And so therefore what you have now is these, like I go to Africa and you'll have people who are bleaching their skin because they think the ideal beauty of whiteness is blue eyes, like fair skin, et cetera, et cetera. Well, how do you get these ideas is because institutions were built off of the suppression of other people. And so it's not that hate is, the sole propriety of hate is owned by white people, because everybody hates one another. We can go to, Ireland, we can go to Rwanda, we can see in South Africa, we can see the Zulu and Xhosa. We know that people will hate each other if they look alike. However, how have systems and institutions been built off of that hate? And how have people benefited off of that? And is it almost impossible to deconstruct those ideas and systems? And that's the ultimate problem with racism.
And that, folks, was question number 1.
Hey, I'd like to add just one quick thing. I think this from history. When we took U.S. history, we took this there was the Dred Scott decision, and in the Dred Scott decision, if you recall, there was a slave who they traveled to a non-slave state. And so the argument was, well, since I'm now in a non-slave state, that I'm not a slave anymore. And so it went back and forth on the courts, and that went to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the decision came down basically that, well, yes, legally true, you're not in a slave state anymore, but you're only considered to be, and here it is, 3/5 of a person. You're considered like property. You're like cattle. You're like, oxen, any other things. So you're property. So you are owned, and not a man. And so I believe that thinking that someone is less than, because I'm a math person, you guys know that. So, one whole is greater than 3/5. And I think that the subconscious mathematical construct of how we look at people, it could be different things, but whenever we're talking about race, is that if I think I am whole and you're not as whole as I am, or you're less than me, then I feel like I can dominate you and to control you. And that's been set up in these systems and structures that have been established legally by law in the United States that have a major impact on how we see each other today, and then eventually what we're seeing going on today as well.
Okay, let's move on to talking to our kids. Somebody asked, am I a horrible person if I don't want to have these types of conversations with my children?
I think it's an interesting question because I think there are many conversations I don't want to have with my kids, but I know that they're important to have with my kids. And so that's the part of parenting that's always hard, right? Is that balance of, I don't want to do it this way, but this is what I got to do because I'm not I'm not raising children to remain at home and to remain in a protected bubble. I'm raising kids to be citizens of the world and to be productive in doing that. And so I would say just because you're uncomfortable with it, just because you don't want to do it, that doesn't mean you have the right to not do it. If I could be blunt enough to say that.
No, that's awesome. Kind of a follow up question was, when I have these conversations, do I need to be fully honest about my biases and prejudices with my children, or will that just make it worse?
Can I say something on this part?
Of course.
So the development, and I should have brought my statistics. The development of the brain is that children are sponges at young age. Um, they observe things you think they're not observing. And I will try to get you that resource. There's a gentleman who did a study and talked about our brain has compartments and boxes, and it starts at a younger age. So if mom flinches at something, the
Mm.
child says, "Oh, that's negative." If mom looks like, say, you may have a housekeeper who doesn't look like them, and mom, is negative and talks under their breath, the child is processing all that. These are the pre-actions that I don't think parents understand, that when you do these things, your child is observing and absorbing what you're doing. So if you are completely positive, you usually have a child who sees things as positive, right? So when you don't want to talk about something, 9 times out of 10, you have had a negative reaction to that part. So let's say most parents don't want to talk about sex with their children. Um, you have to talk about it because social media will do it for you. And I'm pretty sure no one wants what's on social media to teach their children sex education. And
Amen.
that goes
Amen.
the same as race.
Amen.
You don't want social media to teach your children about race or the LGBT community or anything. You need to be honest and share your family values age appropriately. And there's plenty of resources. But let me give you an example. When I talked to the children yesterday, they asked about riots and protests. I said, let me show you the difference. When I call you in for recess, and you're like, oh man, I really wanted more time, that's a little protest. But when I'm ready to walk off and you decide to break the rule and stay, now you're in the riot mode. You're breaking my rules. My rules is line up and let's go so we can start our next lesson. So that example, you can take examples out of your family, your classroom, and use that. That's practical, that they can understand. You have to think, where's your children and what do they deal with and how can I help them understand what's going on? The biases, they have biases as well. And you can go from there. Like, when you did your birthday party, you didn't invite Jose. Why is that? And then you talk through that. These are actions that you have to consistently do. Again, you cannot keep all of a sudden we're all going to come together. We got to fix the problem. Problem, I'm gonna stop there.
Well, I mean, but you're right though, because
Amen.
I can remember coming home and telling my father what I thought was a hilarious joke that ended up being a black joke, and my dad did not think that was funny, and he had to explain to me why that was why that was not funny. So that was my peers kind of teaching me about race, and informing my ideas about race. So if you don't have those conversations, they're gonna get what they get.
And so if to both of the wonderful explanations from the ladies before me, I think one of the things, and if I could be candid, is that the church, and I don't want to assume your audience, but I think Christians especially need to understand the importance of telling the truth. And because what happens is we assume that reconciliation can happen without truth telling, and it's not possible. You cannot have reconciled community, you cannot have reconciled people. The basic fundamentals of our theology is you cannot be reconciled to God until you come to an acknowledgement of how flawed and broken you are. But the problem is in our society, what I think our theology does is because of its middle class, upper middle class posture as a Western civilization, we want this veneer that we have everything together. And so if I tell my kids that I have these prejudices, if I expose the prejudices of my neighbors or the soccer moms of your best friend, then I'm not. Then that in some ways taints this religion I have, and that's not the case. The reality of it is that, and I said this on a phone call yesterday. when we make sin cheap, we also make grace cheap. And we tend not to believe that the glorious God that we believe and we trust in can do away the wickedness in our heart. And I think about reconciliation projects like Rwanda, where people are being reconciled after killing family members. Or it's amazing if you look at the just Google or research the Rwandan Reconciliation Project. It's probably not called that, but it's something tantamount to that. And so, if we don't tell the truth, then there will never be any true reconciliation. That's basically um, the bottom line. So, yes, it's very imperative that you have these conversations, because to Mrs. Frank's point, is it all right if I call you Miss Franks? I don't know if that's then somebody you're going to learn.
That's good.
Okay, you're going to learn from someone else, and the reality is you're going to learn someone else's values, and you don't
Right.
want someone else's values.
Right.
And
Go
so
ahead.
sorry.
No, go
No,
ahead.
I just wanted to add in, as a white woman speaking into this, I have learned that talk is great, but action is so much more important for my kids.
Yes.
And so it's not just what I say, but it's who I surround myself with. It's who I surround my family with.
Amen.
It's where we go. It's what we do. You know, we're members of a predominantly African American church because it's a phenomenal church, but it's also that we need to surround ourselves with the beautiful diversity that God has created. And so it's the actions that speak louder than those words. And our kids will realize that if we're just talking to them, but we're not backing it up with action, they'll think they can do the same thing in that. And so just be careful with that.
Hey, let me ask you, because one of the things we had a racial reconciliation panel at our church on Sunday, and one of the things they talked a lot about was the importance of proximity. If you live in a world that is very homogenous, then you don't get other people to speak into your life about their experiences, and so you end up having a lot of group think. So, what was your reasoning for deciding to join a predominantly black church?
Well, it was kind of easy for me just because I grew up in Central America. So I grew up in, of course, a Hispanic, a Honduran church. And then when moved back to the United States and starting a family, we were in a community and we went to a church there that was somewhat diverse, but not really. And then when we moved where we are now, started praying and realized that God was calling us to this church. We went and visited one time, and it was very evident that He was calling us to this. It was interesting, though, in that process, because I had, knowing the differences between our children and their personalities and how God made them uniquely, I had prepped my oldest and my youngest for, hey, we're going in a church where we are going to be the minority or the ones who aren't seen as much, and I just need to go ahead and prep you for that. I didn't with my middle kid because she's just different, and I knew that I didn't think she would see anything in reality. As we were leaving, she was about 7, and she pulled me down to her level and she said, "Mom, there's a lot of brown people here." And so it was a beautiful discussion of, yeah, and isn't it amazing that they worship just like we do, and that they praise God with the same words and as everyone does, that we know who praises God. And so we've been there for about 5.5 years now, and it's really helped us. I would, going back to that proximity, one of the things that we discuss is the need to, with proximity, is to create relationships, but to be careful with those relationships that they're not just transactional relationships. They're not just relationships for me to gain from them, but they're true personal relationships where we're in this together. And so just be very careful as you enter in this dialogue, if you're just beginning, not to find people that you can learn from just for that, because that's not proximity in reality, but to create relationships that are meaningful to both. So
That is so good.
Can I say thank you? Can I say thank you to that? Because I've received multiple texts from people who look like me, are overwhelmed with their um, people who don't look like us.
White
What should I
people.
do? What do I need?
Yes. You can say it, white
How do
people.
I help?
We know
How
what
do
you're
I
talking
help?
about.
I know. How? And they're like, I can't, I'm not your teacher. I can't do it. I can't do it. And so I love what you said, Jenny, about being, not being transactional, but being deliberate that there's value, because we do it in other areas. Like I really had to remove a friend and put them down to associate about 5 or 6 years ago. And I still cared. But they weren't bringing value and I don't feel like I was bringing the value they needed, and so it wasn't a friendship. And that's how you do, I would think, everyone, especially people who have different cultures, right? Because if I don't want him to be your friend, so I understand how white people think. That's not why I want to be your friend. I want to have intellectual conversations, or laugh, or watch goofy stuff like Dumb and Dumber. I would never watch that. I just threw that out there. So, that's what I want in a friendship, an array of things. And I love what you said, Jenny. That is so true.
Let me throw in there too, because every black friend I have has said that same thing, that they have had a barrage of texts and emails and phone calls from white friends or acquaintances or people that they have not talked to in 25 years, saying, I'm so sorry and what can I do? I think that although it is overwhelming, yes, it is overwhelming. I'll admit that. I felt like a Black history teacher for the last couple of, for the last week, but it is overwhelming. But I do feel a sense of responsibility, because I feel like I cannot be upset that they don't understand if I don't tell them what my experience is. If we don't open our mouths and say, this is why I have been feeling like I'm in mourning for the last 2 weeks. This is why this has been so painful for me. And so I don't want to, I don't want to encourage people. I don't want to discourage white people that are listening right now to not reach out to people. Because I feel like we definitely need to have these conversations. But I do appreciate, though, what you said, Jenny, that don't make it a transactional thing. If you're going to call me and I haven't talked in this long, let's not end it because I answered your questions,
Amen. So we want to avoid being trite. And I think that's in just any general relationship. You want to make sure that there's authenticity and there's you're genuine in your interaction. And I appreciate what Jenny said. I do think I have somewhat, and not to disagree with anything anyone said, I do think when we talk about proximity, and I think Jenny is doing this, is that you have to make sure that even in your proximity that you're doing it on, I think Black people are the only people in a people group, better yet, in America that struggles with being isolated in dignity, right? Other people groups isolate themselves, and not like isolated just because I don't like white people, I don't like Latino people, I don't like this, but for the most part, Black people were either isolated due to racism or due to poverty. And usually what happens is, if we want to progress in life, we say, I want to escape, or I want to get away from, which means there's a negative connotation to where I come from, and in order to progress, I need to get to this place. A little controversial ideology would be, I do think reconciliation is necessary. I do think all people should be involved in reconciliation. However, there are certain people who are actually called to that. Mm-hmm. And that, when I mean called to that, I mean being actually integrated into particular institutions where they're fighting the fight to be a part of a school. They're fighting the fight to be a part of a particular company. They're doing podcasts like this where they have the energy to actually engage in the conversation, to be that history teacher, to educate people. And there are other people who I think more like me, who are like, I don't have a problem talking to all the white people in the world as long as it's on my terms. But my energy, honestly, my energy and my effort is going to be towards, how do I build up the Black community? How do I create jobs there? How do I give my energy and resources to these people? When I make music, I am making music for this particular people group because I just identify with this. Now, when that becomes Lord over my life, then yes, that's a problem. However, I don't think the love and the affections that I have for this people group is a problem with the Lord. And so I would say, when we talk about proximity, I do think sometimes it can become an idol, and it oftentimes comes at the detriment of Black people, because Black people are usually the ones who have to suppress or like, I've been a part of a lot of multicultural movements, most particularly churches and nonprofit organizations. And usually what is done, it's done to make white people feel comfortable in Black spaces. And I would just make sure that we guard against that. And then when white people do want to relocate, you'll understand you are relocating like Jenny has done, with the purposes and the intuition to know, like, I am removing my, for the lack of a better word, preferences in order to integrate into a culture. Like, I'm a missionary, and not the missionary in the sense that you're becoming a missionary to the, but like, I am moving to another culture, and I am going to learn the culture. I'm going to be a part of the culture. I'm not coming to appropriate the culture. I'm not coming to gentrify the culture. I am coming to be a part of the culture and an asset, and to learn, and not to save or to be a hero.
I love it. And let me just read something that one of our listeners said. She said, I agree with sharing and enlightening, but the onus is not on the oppressed to educate the oppressor. Conversations are important, but please take the responsibility to find resources. I thought that was good. Yeah. Okay, let me ask here another question, if I can find it. Oh, here's what somebody said. So many are afraid to say the wrong thing. How can I avoid offending?
Can you repeat that, please? Sorry, I want to make sure I heard it correctly. Sorry.
Well, basically, and you've seen it on social media. I know that people and people have even called me and said these things. I've said, I typed something and then I erased it, and then I typed something and I erased it. I was afraid to say anything offensive, so I just called you because I knew you would understand my heart if I talked to you. I understand the fear in that. So what this person is asking, how do I avoid offending when I start broaching these conversations?
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I want because I think this. Yes, go ahead.
No, I just, in the process of what I've learned when I take that learner stance, when I take the stance of not being the one who's going to speak truth into the situation, but really who's going to learn no matter what I'm saying, that it really helps. And that as people get to know my heart and are able to meet me where I am, well, not meet me where I am, but correct me and where I am. And if I have the humility to listen and to acknowledge that I was wrong, that it helps tremendously. I have made many mistakes, but in those mistakes I have grown incredibly. So I don't try, of course I don't want to continue making mistakes, but I don't try to shy away from the learning is where I try to engage in the learning. And I don't know if that helps answer some of that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think this is, I don't know, I'm slightly, I don't know, I struggle with the lack of grace we have for people who are trying to learn. I genuinely think if somebody really if they're really trying to be an ally, as the term is used, or if they're really trying to grow and learn, like, I don't understand why we have little patience with people who may ask stupid questions. I ask stupid questions when I'm trying. I remember getting married and trying to understand my wife. I'm sure my wife was like, boy, you are asking some of the stupidest questions. But 17 years married now, I understand. I would like to think I understand women better. I definitely understand my wife better. And the same thing with LGBT community. Same thing with whatever. Like, you don't understand people until you engage.
Yeah.
And if you don't allow me, Henry Nouwen, a Catholic theologian, says, hospitality is not forcing change to happen, but it's creating an environment where change can possibly happen. And if we don't create hospitable spaces where people can potentially say some things that are like, then I don't know if change will ever happen. However, I will say this: doing it over social media is somewhat dangerous because the toxic way we communicate, right? It's all public performance. And in public performance, people are trying to look good. People are trying to shame people. People are trying to put on this veneer. And if you can do it in the privacy of a conversation, a one-on-one intimate conversation, I think that's best. I'm just not a fan of having these extreme deep dialogues over social media because we just have a propensity to try to perform, and it's never helpful. But I will say, like, we are in a very sensitive time. People are sensitive, and I get why people are sensitive. And I'm not trying to say people shouldn't be sensitive. However, I do think we allow our sensitivity to shut people off. Like, I'm not a fan of cancel culture. I don't think if you cancel people, people will never grow. People need to learn why. There are some things that need to be canceled. However,
I'm sorry.
Need to understand.
What is cancel culture?
Oh, wow. So it's basically
sorry, I have no idea what you're talking about.
it's basically if someone gets on if someone's so for instance Drew Brees, right? Drew Brees, I don't know if you know the football player. Drew Brees,
Yeah.
quarterback for New Orleans Saints. My father played for the New Orleans Saints, so let me be clear, I have a little sensitivity to the New Orleans Saints. Drew Brees made some statements that were really ill-informed yesterday about the protest, the NFL protest, and how does he feel. And Drew Brees is a white man, for those who don't know. Asked about Colin Kaepernick and the protest of during the kneeling during the national anthem, and he said, "I will never." I'm not, word for word. I'm going to butcher it, but basically he said, "I will never agree with the disrespect of the flag in our nation." What Drew fails to understand is, for the longest time, people have been trying to explain this is not a disrespect to the flag, nor to a disrespect to the people who serve our country. What this is a protest against brutality and systemic injustice within our country. And people have been ostracized, mainly Colin Kaepernick, for doing that very thing. And so people said, you know what, we're canceling Drew Brees, blah, blah, blah. He's done. We're not going to deal with him anymore. And my thing is like, yeah, he needs to be corrected. He needs to be rebuked. However, we can't just shut people off because they don't learn that way. People don't learn when you cut them off from society.
Mm-hmm.
They learn because you pull them aside, you give them a spanking, and you say, don't go back out there and do that again. You know what I'm saying? And then when they go back out there and do it again, you pull them back in. You say, guess what? You did something stupid again. You know, we give people opportunity, and I think that's the problem with our society when we have these conversations over social media. We tend to just shut people off, and I think it's most of it's ego. So I'll just shut up. But
No,
yeah.
that was so good. I had to be honest though. I didn't know what you were talking about, and I felt like I maybe wasn't alone.
If I can add something with that, just speaking as a white woman, I think it's really important that the white community does not get defensive when we are corrected.
Absolutely.
Or when we are told that something is offensive. You have to guard against getting defensive. If I can just add that little piece.
Yes.
Please, amen, and please.
And I want to say a couple of things because this has come up, and this is probably in a different direction a little bit. So one of your questions I know we talked about was what do people like to be called? So one of the things I like to challenge people who ask me that is, what conversation are you having that you have to identify people by their race or their heritage? Like you have to think about, what are you saying that you have to say, the black, is it okay for me to say black, or do you want African American? I wanted the story you were giving me. Now you take me to a whole nother train. I don't even want to know the story, right? If you're telling a story, unless it's actually vital, and usually if you're telling that story, you're comfortable with that person, you should be able to ask that person, are they offended in what way, regarding race? Because it's not just African American Black, it's also Latina X, and there's a preference in that community as well. And if you're close enough to the person, you should be able to ask. If you're not, should you be telling a story that deals with race? I just want you to think that through. And then I also want to take something. People of color is all shades and
Right.
browns. So if you say person of color, it's not about black people. It's about all the shades. We actually in the NAIS, the National Association of Independent Schools, hosts a People of Color conference, and literally everyone is invited. Now, our brothers and sisters, our allies who are white, are not so much invited because some of the spaces can be hard to be in and talk about. Um, but I've learned, and I might get some flack off of this if any of them are watching, but I want you to learn from these educators what we're saying and what we're thinking and what we want to do to make our schools better. Because when we all go back into the real world after we leave this conference, we're hit beyond, how was the conference? What did you learn? How can I be better? How can I hold on? Let's take this deliberate and be proactive and do something that's long lasting, right? And you have to share all that. It's so nice to have someone who is white with me stand, and a real ally, an activist, not an ally, sorry, an activist, that we can take the things we learned at the conference, or even there's one also called the White Privilege Conference, and people don't go to that because it says White Privilege Conference, but the amount of information and education, intellect, it's overwhelming. I haven't been, but I get to get the information when I send people. the resources. You want to know how to teach your classroom, or you want to share with your parents. These conferences are important, and usually they are for educators. But I'm telling you, support your schools, districts. Get in there, because the information, me giving you all the information, is from going to these conferences or having these one-on-one with experts. And understanding people's perspective of all races. These conversations can't be just among people who look like me or people of color. The conversation has to be with everybody. I told you I was going to take this a little off, but that just sparked me the question, because when I tell a story, I don't think race always has to be a part of the story and be corrected. Like, is it okay? I don't, I don't know. Yes, is it part of the story? Does it help me laugh or understand your point? Like, I don't understand why that part. But do I do agree with show? I'm not defensive at all. I love talking about it. If you want to talk about it, I am like, yes. And I have ran into people who are totally opposite thinking about race, who tell me that white privilege doesn't exist. I don't get mad. We have a conversation. Why do you think that? I've
Yeah.
literally have taken a white person, and they told me white privilege didn't exist. So we went to a restaurant. We went to, I was going to say the store name. We went to a high end store, um, and
Name
we went three
dropping.
places. I can't remember. And I said, I'm going to predict what's going to happen.
Mm.
When we are seated at the restaurant, they're going to look at you where you want to sit. When we get the check, they're gonna, oh, which one? It's gonna be your option, and then they're gonna, like, who gets the check? And then I just went through, and believe it or not, they finally got, you really deal with this?
Mm.
Not. I mean, it depends on how many places I go, mostly daily. Yeah, I deal with that. I deal with, can I help you? Well, she was here first. You want to help her? Assist
I'm
with
like,
Felicia
amen. Give him
speaking.
the check. Give him the check. Let him pay for it.
I know that's right. Hey, I wanted.
So I just wanted to. Sorry, I did take that somewhere else,
No,
but
that's
that was
okay. And along the lines of the offending, you said something so great, show, in one of the videos that you had, that you posted, that we don't have homogeny of thought in the black community, same as any
Right.
community. What did you mean by that?
I think oftentimes, so there's a lot of nomenclature out there that will say like black people aren't a monolith, but then, however, when it comes to issues like this, we assume that all black people think the same about every issue, and it's not true. This has always been the case since there was ever a Negro problem in America. People have always thought of different ways on how to deal with slavery. You had those who were like, well, let's just wait for it to be for the government to end it itself. There were those who were like, no, let's just create revolution. And sadly enough, there were those who were content in slavery, right? Then once the Reconstruction came, they were like, well, how do we forward progress as a people? There were some who was like, well, let's isolate and start our own colleges, Booker T. Washington, Tuskegee. Then there are those who are like, no, we need to integrate into a greater educational system, W.E. Du Bois, and so on and so forth. The difference between the Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, and even today, you have different organizations that protest differently and figure how do we deal with racism, white supremacy in our nation. And I think the first thing that we do a disservice to in our communities is that we think everybody feels the same way about issues, that all black people fall on the same political spectrum, that we
Mm-hmm.
fall all on the same fill in the blank. And until we get to a point where we recognize that one person doesn't speak for the whole of black people, I don't think we're going to have a good chance of progressing. This is part of my problem with how we vote for the last 30 some years. I'm just throwing a number out there, but since Jimmy Carter, pretty much, um, 80, I think it's as much as 88% of the black vote has been to the Democratic Party. Now, this is not me saying that black people should vote Republican. However, what I am saying, if a political party knows that 80% of its vote is coming to them no matter what kind of policies they institute, that really means they don't have to do anything for you because they know you're getting your vote. And so I believe there has to be a radical shift, not only in how we see, and I'm against like theologically, spiritually, socially, how we engage, but also politically. And until we start to realize that we have a diversity of thought and that certain people, black people are going to argue over school choice versus public schools. They're going to argue over abortion, pro-life. Black people are going to argue over LGBT and affirmation and non-affirming. Then we can't have civilized discussions around it. Then we can't progress as a people.
I want to interject in there real quick on this. So, with My experiences have been, I told you in the beginning of the show, growing up, having been called, a nigger. I thought that was my middle name. Growing up, it was a lot and it was painful. Versus, I have, some other African American friends who've, been in, almost exclusively African American context, who've never been called a nigger, and in the racial. Then there's a whole debate about, okay, oh, how come black people can say nigger to each other? That's a whole other discussion. But that from someone else, who is white, calling them, they haven't had those experiences before, or thinking that all black people are, come from single parent homes. No, I came from a two parent home, college educated, and my mother was a housewife. Um, and I'm still African American, and so I had to deal with the battle of being black enough, in the African American community as well. As far as who you are, and if you don't do it like this or think like this as well. So just to say that, just like there are different philosophies and approaches to life, with all people, it's the same with African Americans. So just to put these brushing generalizations over people, or to say if you don't talk like this or act like this or be like this, that means that you're not this, or as well.
Yeah.
So that's it's a whole other layer conversation. But
I'm
there's a
mostly
diversity there.
I'm and I agree, and I'm mostly frustrated with people. I'm granted people who black you can't you have no control over your parents living in a particular community and being educated, et cetera, et cetera. That's your upbringing. Um, I'm mostly frustrated with people who speak for black people,
Uh-oh.
but have no real interest in the black community. And I find so many activists. I find that there are so many activists who claim to be spokespeople for the black community on areas of justice, areas of this, but they don't really live in black communities. Some of them are not even married to black people. And it's just like, I look at them, I'm like, is this just a performance for you? Or is this something that you really invested your life into? And so for me, that to me is a more egregious thing than somebody who's recognizing, like, look, I come from I yes, my skin's black, this and that, but there are some things I just don't connect with what will be seen as culturally black. I just, I didn't grow up watching Martin. I didn't grow up listening to Tribe Called Quest. I didn't, and and who's to say like those things are inherently black? I would say they are, but I can't take somebody else's blackness because they didn't do that. You know what I mean? But the one thing I will say is, if you speak for black people, and I can't see your footprint in black community and black business and black worship and black fill in the blank, then I need you to be quiet.
Mm.
Can I answer the teaching to help your parents real quick? Show said something, and I want to go back to that. We talked about parents want to know what they can do. So let me give them 2 points real quick. So teaching your children the platforms. First of all, hopefully they're learning government at the age appropriate time. They're learning about government, but teaching your children about platforms of each of all the parties, that's a teachable moment. Showing them, and you'll be surprised. And people ask me, "Are you Democrat or Republican?" I'm purple, because if you really look at the platforms, and I teach my children, if you look at both sides of platforms and our family's values, we take a little bit of you and we take a little bit of you, and we have to vote in that mind frame for my family, my neighborhood, and my city. Then another teachable moment for your children that's pretty, you can take them pretty young, is city council meetings, right?
Amen.
Um, these are things that they can actually see and hear. Now, right now, the city councils are full, and so speaking of being black and having different, I'm not mourning in the same way everybody else is. I'm mourning because in 3 weeks, when COVID-19 is back up at the topic, people of all races, black, white, are going to go back to their lives. Before all this happened, and I've been saying this, people are becoming selfish. They love their comforts. They love their Starbucks. They love their friends going and hanging out at White Rock Lake and different things. They enjoy these things. There's nothing wrong with it. But people go deep into their comfort zone. That everybody around me looks like me. There's no intentionality. There's no movement of make sure we're not here again. So taking my kids to go vote. Those are things that you can do so they can see who's there. Hopefully multicultural people that are voting. Um, you can take them to different places. And one other teachable moment, because I know we're running out of time. When you go take your children to the library and pick books,
Mm-hmm.
Pick books that not stereotype books. Please don't do that. Pick books with some of the same similar stories that just like Mr. Bailey said. Uh, he has this background, and but a lot of people think single parent homes. It's okay that Black people have the same background as everyone else, a Latino family, or so forth and so on. And then I suggest if you don't know the culture, read the book prior to, figure out what you don't know, go research it, and then when you read it with your child and they have a question, you're prepared. That's being proactive. Because if we all go to the city council meetings in a month, if we all make sure we're voting according to our family, our neighborhood, our values, X, Y, and Z, change will happen.
Hmm.
It may not be what we all want, but we all had a voice. Everybody keeps saying, I don't have a voice. Well, it starts
Hmm.
teaching your children why it's important to vote. Don't teach them when they're 17.
Mm. Mm.
Teach them when they're 3 and 5 that mommy takes me every time, daddy takes me every time, grandma, whoever the guardian is, takes me to go vote. That means if it's important to them, again, they're sponges and they're absorbing what you do.
Can I? Amen. And I want to emphasize something. I think that when she talks about voting for parents, understand. And this may be. I don't. Once again, I don't want to assume your audience. Once again, I think a lot of the Christian community, especially white evangelicals, have forfeited a lot of their legitimacy when it comes to uh, moral. I could say moral. What's the word? A moral standard. It's just for the lack of a better. I can't think of it. When you vote for someone because you want to maintain power over compassion. And I think a lot of what the Christian community has said was flushed down the toilet with their alignment with a president who I don't care if he's put a Supreme Court justice in that fits your values. I don't care if he's done this and done that, and you say this is helpful for the Christian community. With all the other things that come along with the baggage that this individual brings, I think it torments, and it destroys whatever witness you thought you had to the world. And I think parents must understand that when they look at their kids and they talk about voting, or they voted this particular way, the things that you do will impact um, the lives of your children.
So I want to say, our audience is not necessarily Christian, but
Oh, okay.
no, well, no, that's not my
So
point.
I
No.
can cuss a couple times, is what you're saying.
Oh yeah, I mean, sure. I did invite people to have their children would listen with them, so maybe not. But what I wanted to say was, our kids are watching, whether or not you're Christian or not, but our kids are watching us. They're watching the decisions they make. They're watching the people that we align to or aligned with. And that is very important, whatever religion you are, whatever party you are, whatever, they are watching and they see more than what we even say. They're
Absolutely.
watching what we're doing more than what we say. Hey, Jenny, your head is nodding. Your head is nodding so fast. I wanted to see what you had to say about this.
Well, mine's just going to follow up in regards again to the Christian community, and it's just our allegiance is not in politics, and our allegiance is in unity in Christ. And I think politics divides so much, and so especially in regards to racial reconciliation, it's one thing that nobody knows how I vote or who I vote for, because that's not going to become what would you call it? It's not going to become something that is a determining factor between our relationship.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I want to add one more quick thing. So, just as a side source, last night my daughter, I don't know what she was doing. She stubbed her toe, or hit something, and she was in tears, screaming. Um, she came to me, and usually, like, our family is more of a like suck it up and kind of keep going type of family with regards
Unless
to
you're
pain.
bleeding or
Right,
broken.
right. Unless you're dying or the blood spewing out of you, then
I
suck
like
it up.
that.
Yeah. So, but I was looking at her, and first I was asking her, so, you know, what happened? She's screaming in pain. What happened? Um, how'd you get here? What did you do? Why Why weren't you doing what you're supposed to do? Why, what, and then it was like, no, wait, no, 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 no. I need to come alongside her.
Amen.
And I'm not, because I mean, we've all had pain before, but I'm not feeling her pain because I'm not her. So I can't feel her pain, but I can come alongside her in her pain. So I changed it up. And, usually it's more the suck it up, um, but I was like, no, I brought her alongside me. I put her in my lap. I gave her a kiss. And I loved on her and said, "I'm so sorry for the pain. How basically how can I serve you?" And so she said she wanted a couple of things here. I went and got those for her and came back alongside her versus uh, judging, finger pointing, assuming it was I'm in pain, my daughter's in pain. I'm going to come with you into your pain. I can't feel your pain. I can't. You can't experience racism if you've never experienced racism before. But it's to say that this is the pain is valid.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
love you, and I'm gonna come alongside you. And so I think God showed me that yesterday, just to share with people that to come alongside, to come and to seek understanding, but then see how can we now bridge, make bridges, build relationships, start healing, mending, and not just assuming, but also vice versa, allowing people, so my African American friends or of any culture or race, to let people to come into your life if they want to come into your life, and don't assume that they know the pain. Share. We have to educate. We have to help people to understand both sides of what's going on. So don't be mad when someone doesn't understand, but also don't assume as well.
That
David,
was
that was.
very
Are
well.
we
I
shutting it
was
down?
gonna
Because I
no
don't.
no 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 no. I was gonna say that
Okay.
was well put, but go ahead.
Yeah, David, that was excellent. Because it's so funny you use that analogy because that sparked up an anecdote in my own brain. When I was 18 or 17 years old, I was still living with my father. Senior in high school, I got robbed at gunpoint in a neighborhood that I probably shouldn't have been in. And when I got home, my father was remarried to a parole officer. And the moment I got home, I got all the questions very similar to what you do with your daughter. Well, it wasn't like, "Oh, I feel sorry for you." It was like, "What were you doing? I lived in California, so gang affiliate communities, and they were like, "What color were you wearing? Why were you out this late? Blah 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 blah." And it was never like, "Oh, I'm sorry for you." And I think the problem was that his wife had all these assumptions of me, right? She had a caricature of who I was, right? She didn't see me in my full humanity. And even if I was doing something I shouldn't have been doing, like if I was hanging out late that night and my curfew was at 10, that doesn't mean that ill things can't happen to me. And I think what one of the greater problems with the narratives around some of these police killings is that we are trying to figure out, well, they might have deserved these things. These individuals should have complied, or they should have done this, or whoa, why were they smoking weed? Or oh, why was he out there? Why was he trying to use a forged $20 bill? And the reality is that that's not the problem. The problem is that I mean, granted, those things are not good. However, I think the way we view people is systemically problematic from Jump Street. And anytime we begin to start to create reasons and justifications why people are murdered, I think that is a sign of a country that fetishes over violence, and we love to use violence as a solution. And I think that one is our problem. That's how we built this country. We stole the land through violence. When people try to respond peacefully, we respond with violence, i.e., the civil rights movement, a lot of these protests. It's just violence is always the answer. And I think until we begin to see people as human beings and love one another and see them made in the image of God, no matter what their views are on life, no matter what they're doing in the moment, especially when there's a nonviolent act, we're going to continue to see these problems.
Y'all, that's so good. We are running out of time. I did want to touch on one other topic because we've had a really wonderful conversation about race and race relations, but there are definitely people who don't want to broach this subject. They don't want to talk about it. So, one of the questions that one of the parents had was, is it okay to raise my children to be colorblind?
No.
I agree. No, the world's not colorblind. Are you preparing your kids to go into the world?
That reminds me of higher learning. I don't know why.
The movie Higher Learning.
The movie
Yeah.
Higher Learning, when what is it? Not GD. What was his name? The white man on there who was trying to fit in,
Oh
and then
yeah,
he ended up fitting into the wrong way. If
Michael
you
Rappaport. Yeah.
do, yes, if you do not do that, when your child goes into the world, they're going to figure out, oh, I didn't know anything about that. Let me see about this one. Oh, I didn't know anything about. Let me see. And they may choose the wrong group. You have to start with you, because when they've never, I remember going to college and this gentleman from Alaska said, "Can I touch your hair?" And I was, and that is my pet peeve. No, you cannot. I've never seen a black person before. How is that possible? Do you not have TV? And he was like, I really didn't watch TV. And then we go to California and surf. And so I didn't really. And then I had to be not defensive. Even at a young age, I wanted to be not defensive and talk about seeing black people and what that means. And that it's an array of us. Some of us don't speak grammatically correct, and some of us do. And sorry, I know I'm rambling, because that right
No, you're
there,
good. You're good.
you have to prepare your children for the real world. Because if I wasn't who I am today, the response of asking to touch my hair, he could have came back with some fingers missing. Do you understand what I'm saying? Because when they ask to touch your hair, they're already going in. They're not
Yeah,
really
right.
waiting
It's
for
like,
your
can I?
answer,
Can
right?
I?
Um, no, I'm not an African American museum, but he didn't know, so I had to not. And I don't know how I was blessed, considering where I was in life at that time, to not be defensive. But I did show him, okay, you can touch my hair. Let's talk about my hair, your hair, and we had a great conversation. Um, but he cannot come in the real world in college and expect to now learn about things he should have known about at 3 and
Right.
5,
It's
7,
not.
10.
It's not about being colorblind. It's about being color brave. I mean, we
Yeah, yeah. It's
there's
okay.
for that.
Yeah, well,
It, wor-
I'm
Let me just
sorry.
say this: world
Yeah.
changers. Well, don't you want to raise a world changer? Like someone, it takes, and and I teach history. It takes one person really to change the world for good or bad. And you have to teach them the history. You have to teach them about Mahatma Gandhi. You have to teach them about Martin Luther King. You have to teach Hitler. Not Don't start with the hate. Start with, how in the world did he get there? Talk about that history. Teach them so they'll understand.
Absolutely.
Teach them. And it's not just colorblind, because if you start with race, it's going to transcend on all the identities that are different than them. I'm sorry, I'm a little passionate. I'll be quiet. Go ahead,
No,
Sean.
that's
Sorry.
good.
Don't apologize.
I'm sorry. Let me just say one thing real quick here. So, also in the whole in the color blindness conversation, to value not just um, we're all the same, but to value and also incorporate someone else's culture POV into yours. We can say we're diverse, but as long as you think like me or talk like me or listen to the same type of music that I listen to, or worship like me, or understand the world like me, then we're good. But true understanding of how to incorporate is to say, you know what, your experience is different from mine. Let me understand it, and let me value it, and let me experience it, and it is just as valuable as mine. Because when we don't have that, then we just have assimilation, and people may think that, if we're all doing the same thing the same way, but we don't look like each other, then we are all good with us, but no, it's valuing. I love hip hop. I've loved hip hop my whole life, and that's okay. I don't have to see things the way you do, or worship the way you do, or whatever it is. But to truly see someone else's point of view, see where they are and understand it, but then also to embrace it and then experience it for yourself. I think we miss out on so much because we don't experience other people's point of views
Right.
one way or the
Yes.
other. And that we could keep on going, but I just wanted to drop that in there as well.
That's
Yeah.
so good. So good.
So we are so out of time, and part of the reason why I know that is because I saw David silently scolding one of our children who was trying to come in the room.
Daddy, can I have some candy? Can I have some candy, Daddy?
Right.
I'm on a show. I'm on a show.
I did want to quickly mention some resources. There were a lot of people saying, what resources can I look to? Specific books. You mentioned a couple. Mention those again. Show the books that you were recommending.
There's so many, but the ones I've recommended was Stamped from the Beginning by Ibram Kendi, and then Nell Irvin Painter's History of White People. In regards to the first question, what is racism and where did racism come from? Those books, I think, they're experts in their field, sociologists, anthropologists, who I think historians who do an excellent job on giving the historicity around the history of racism and how white people actually became white people. Like, yeah, the social construct of whiteness.
Yeah, I got to get that. We're going to have to download that. Huh?
I'm going to add two other quick things. There's a book, I forget the name of the author. If you look it up, it was written back in the 90s. It's called The Color Complex, The Politics of Skin Color Among African Americans. I think it'll help to give a historical context as to maybe, well, how come, why is this happening? Amongst why are things happening in the African American community? It just brings a different understanding as to what is happening, which helps to better understand what's happening in the African American community. And then there's an article I came across last night. It is called "How to Not Raise a Racist White Kid." It's on CNN. It's on the CNN website. This is written from a white mother's perspective as well, and I think it's a great first start. Just some good, just practical tips as well, as far as understanding, how to start to bridge, bridge those areas where maybe there may be challenges as well. So I just want to add those in.
I just realized, and I don't know if you guys are familiar with, two other books that I thought were great. One is Slavery by Another Name by Douglas Blackman. I think is a wonderful book that talks about the institution of slavery and how it kind of continued into today's time, and the economic benefits of slavery and how it's morphed into other things. Obviously, The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, the documentary 13th. However, there is one resource that I think is amazing for children. It's the documentary A Class Divided. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. When the white teacher takes her students and separates all her white students by eye color. Mm-hmm. I think that is a wonderful tool to teach racism to kids. It's called A Class Divided.
There's I don't know if y'all have seen this one. This one's I would say this is a middle school book. It's a new kid. It's called New Kid by Jerry Craft. It's fun because it's a comic book series. And I mean, as an adult, I read it and got a lot out of it. I would also say, if in the Christian community, Wide Awake, if you are white, Wide Awake by Dr. Daniel Hill is a phenomenal book. Color of Compromise by Jamar Tidsby is awesome. And then Intentional by D.A. Horton is phenomenal. I echo 13th. We're having our high school students watch that before we enter into discussion in 2 weeks. And then there's another one that's an autobiography by a person who was sold as a slave called The Kidnapped Prince. It is an old book that has been rewritten so that we understand it, and it rocked me to the core because it's an autobiography about being a slave from the 1600s. So I highly recommend The Kidnapped Prince.
Let me just clarify, Jenny, did you say White Awake or Wide Awake?
White Awake.
Gotcha.
And he's coming out with a new one called White Lies.
Okay.
And it's his process of understanding as a white person what he had to go through in order to understand, I guess you'd say, the smog we breathe in of white supremacy in our country.
Okay. Someone online here said the book Raising White Kids. Have you guys heard of that book, Raising White Kids, is also great for examples of why colorblind teaching is not progressive. It also gives examples to white parents of how to teach your children in all different situations.
Also, it's funny you said that because I was going to show that one.
Oh, no kidding.
Which is White Kids, yeah. That's the one I was looking at, like I should pull that down. And then Jenny also brought up another one that's really good. I don't know, Denny, if you sent the list of resources. I didn't get to title all of them, but I sent you a list of resources of articles, videos,
Okay.
and I'll resend it. And I'll put some when we get off. I'll put some on. But if there's teachers on here, I want to definitely talk about this, and I've given it to my teachers at my school. Sorry, it's the guide for white women who teach black boys. It is a book with vignettes in it where it doesn't take long to read, but I think this is so important um, to read for everyone, not just white women, but all teachers and administrators, because it gets you an understanding of some of the plights and some of the things our African American boys are going through, and how why the fear is there when from younger age children all the way to high schoolers and college, they have these and I think Show said it earlier, or someone said it earlier, they have these things already stamped on them, a stereotype before they even open their mouths. And I've experienced that as a mother of a black son. Um, so I want to say it's called, and it's by Moore and Michael, and it's the guide for white women who teach black boys. It's really a good teaching, and parents can read it too. It helps you understand what you don't see in the classroom and how people can teach, and it can be it can be boys and girls as well. Just so. And I'll also try to add some of those in the comments.
Okay, well, we are way over time. As usual, we'll always have the resources that we mentioned on the show on our website, schooldazedshow.com, for your reference. And you guys can pick that up there. Another thing that people were wanting is to know if there's specific speakers or people who they can listen to. So I'll ask you guys to give those to us as well. But I just want to thank you guys so much for joining us and being a part of this discussion. This has been amazing.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
So Noggin Educational Foundation is the premier sponsor of School Days, so we always want to let you guys know what's going on with Noggin. Our mission is to help close the achievement gap for economically disadvantaged children by improving educational opportunities for students, supporting families, and encouraging excellence and innovation in the classroom. School Days is part of our commitment to support families by providing access to experts who offer information and resources regarding all topics that impact education. If you love this program, please consider donating to Noggin. Your gift will be tax deductible. Head to our website, schooldaysshow.com, to give today. And as always, on School Days, we have all of the resources mentioned on School Days. And remember, you don't ever have to miss a show. Find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Play Music, and pretty much anywhere you listen to your favorite podcasts. And don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Noggin Foundation. That's Noggin. And last but not least, we always want to end the show by saying that David and I are parenting by grace. We depend on God to give us the wisdom and strength that we need to raise our kids into flourishing adults. And if you would like to know more about that, please feel free to email me at info@schooldazedshow.com. Have a great week and stay safe.